Well, welcome to our town. Get my mic to work and not be my eyeball. So this is our town, and our town is a program that focuses on people who help to shape the identity of St. Petersburg. And if you have been to the other ones, there's been 2 so far since it's every month. My first guest was our mayor, our new mayor, Rick Kreisman, and my second guest was Beth Morian. So what we had was a public figure, a mayor, and then we had a person who is a major philanthropist in our city, both of which contribute in different ways to shaping how the city goes. And my guest for tonight is Jeff Danner. Now, Jeff Danner is a sort of interesting twist because he has just come off 8 years on our city council. So he's been in that public sector of shaping the way our city has gone. But now, he's just a regular guy, like us. And so one of the things I think is interesting about this and why I wanted Jeff to be the third guest is he's sort of like is straddling, and I think can give us some insight into what those different worlds are like and how they interface, because that's my question. How does that interface work between the public and the private, and who really makes these decisions? So with that, let's re-welcome Jeff Danner.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So as many of you know, my first question is always, how did you get to St. Pete?
I think I got here like a lot of people. My grandparents retired down here from Cleveland in the 60s, so we came down and visited every summer. And several times my parents would bring us down beginning of the summer, leave us here, and then when my grandparents would go up to Cleveland and later in the summer take us back. So we spent quite a few summers from 60s and 70s, and then moved down here full-time in 1980.
When you came down to visit your grandmother, was it in St. Pete? Was it in Clearwater?
She lived in Clearwater, but we always made several treks down to St. Petersburg to see Sunken Gardens and the Bounty and the Pier and Doc Webb's and all those places. So it was we were here every summer along the way. So.
So at that point, so when is this? The 60s?
60s, late 60s, early 70s.
So if you're in Clearwater and you make this trek to St. Pete to see the highlights, was it like it is now? So was it one area, or were they pretty far? Was it hard to get that far?
I think US 19 was under construction at that time, so it's the same. Some things never change. And funny, my grandparents used to talk about it, because one of the things we did one summer was went to Disney World before it opened for the preview. And they said someday we're going to have a monorail that'll go from Clearwater to St. Petersburg. And that was back in the 60s. They were having that conversation, which we're still having those conversations. So,
but now we aren't having a monorail.
Yeah, no, it was very different. Much more tourist, you know, and I was 10, 12, so everyone was very old. And I'm sure they're younger than me. But it did seem very much a retirement community, and just, you know, the beach community in the downtown, but very much a tourist destination.
And your grandparents had a car?
Yes. Yes. So.
And most people who lived around them had cars.
Yeah, no, they live in a typical suburb. They had to drive everywhere and attached right to US 19, so it was driving to the beach every day and then the treks down here. So.
So, when was the decision to move down here permanently from Cleveland?
When I got out of high school. My parents had been divorced for several years. My mom wanted to move down here. We were.
Were there her parents or your dad's parents?
They were my mom's parents.
Oh.
Yeah. But had the 3 worst winters in a row, the 3 years I was in high school in Cleveland, and you know, just horrible. And Cleveland wasn't a great place to be looking for a job in 1979. We were actually watching the clock the day they went bankrupt. At 12:01, the city will be bankrupt, and unemployment was 20%. And you know, the city ran the light plant, the gas plant. We didn't know if the street lights were going to shut off and the cops were going to go home. But not a good place to be looking for a job when you're 19. So like I said, my mom had moved down here, so came down here to look for some work and to get out of 4 feet of snow.
So your mom moved down here before you did?
Right, right.
And you finished your senior year in high school up there, is that?
Yeah, yeah, and then came down here that summer. So, yeah.
And so what did you do?
It was a little different because I was out of high school, but I wasn't 18, so there was no school to go to. Didn't have high school friends to hang out with. Wasn't old enough to go to bars or nightclubs, so I was kind of in between. But it was just I did construction jobs and worked and hung out the beach and bike rode a lot. And I actually went back to Cleveland for a year, thinking things might have picked up and changed, but they hadn't. And then the next winter hit and said, I don't have to be here, and came back down again. So I've been here ever since.
Well, you know, one of the things you just mentioned is an issue in St. Pete, those between years when you're too young to hang out at home and you don't want to be with your parents, but not old enough to go to clubs or...
Right.
And this has been an issue in St. Pete, and I'm sure the city council has spoken about it, and you just raise it, you know, well, what do you do during that time so, you know, you don't get into too much mischief, which,
Right.
of course,
Yeah, it comes
we
up a
all
lot
do.
as to what is the city's role in that environment. I mean, we have recreation centers and after-school programs, but it is that in-between period in high school and you know, to your responsible adults, whatever that is. Well, one of the things we found when we were on the council is, you know, you get a lot of kids that either drop out or they get out of high school at 17 and they don't get into the technical programs till they're 23 or 24. So what are they doing in that period, and how can we close that gap? How can we get kids into job training, trade schools, things like that earlier rather than whatever they did that 5 or 6 years before they decided. And there's good programs. It's just trying to work, you know, with the city, with the schools to get the kids more engaged.
Well, I know that when I was that age, I used to go, you know, to certain places, like when we were down at the shore, because I grew up in New Jersey, we went to the shore. There was a wharf, and we'd all go down there and hang out. I mean, much like young people do
Right.
downtown. And I didn't get into too much trouble, but, you know, I'm of that age where what else are you going to do?
Right.
So, so I mean, it's a big issue. And it'd be good if we could figure out something to do in that regard.
Yeah, it is, and like I say, it comes up pretty often, and again, with parents, it's the soccer, is it roller skating, indoor hockey,
Right.
you know, all those different programs, and some are available here in the city and some aren't, so we're constantly trying to work with the private sector to provide those opportunities, as well as just that sort of free entertainment, that to go hang out downtown or go to the beach, and you don't have to be part of a club or pay a membership fee to get into
Right.
somewhere, because a lot of kids can't. So it's
Right.
finding something to do with that idle time.
Right, and I mean, the reason I'm really asking about this and keep asking about this is because one of the things last year in our town became really important was conversations about education and how to engage young people and to make sure that they have that skills and education so that they can be active citizens of St. Peter wherever they go. But if you have that sort of gap period where there's too many possibilities of doing things that can really injure yourself in your future, it doesn't serve our community to have that. But there's no easy solutions.
Right, right.
And one thing you said was maybe the private sector can do something. Now, how does the city, when they have something, engage the private sector?
Well, I think one of the signs was the issue before Baywalk closed. There was just so many kids in the courtyard, and what we heard was there's nothing to do. And parents were just dropping the kids off. They weren't necessarily going to the movies. They weren't necessarily eating at the restaurants. They were just hanging out in the courtyard. And it became a problem, but it was more of a sign that there needs to be something for them to do, because they weren't all in looking for trouble.
Right.
But it was just finding that activity and whatever that is.
And
so
what was it? I mean, what
Well, then
happened
it
was
was just-
Baywalk closed.
right,
so-
it was just it wasn't a good mix with the retail and the movies to have just that gauntlet of kids doing nothing that didn't mix with the populations they wanted with the restaurants and the movies. But we needed some place for those kids to do something that, again, they weren't necessarily getting into trouble. They just needed something to do, some place to hang out and communicate. So
how is that going to be any different once the Sundial opens?
that's a good question. I haven't heard how they're going to address that issue. I think it's a little different. I mean, it's certainly structurally different. It's more open, so it's not an enclosed courtyard by removing the front. And downtown's different. 10, 15 years ago, Baywalk was the only thing that was open after 6 o'clock. So now that there's 165 restaurants downtown, there's a lot more to do than there was 15 years ago.
Well, So you start doing construction work when you're just here. And do you keep doing that?
Yep, I did it pretty much right up until I got on city council. Construction labor and carpenter, had my own company, got my contractor's license, kind of specialized in restorations and room additions on historic homes, worked in Kenwood, Old Northeast, Old Southeast, did those kind of things. And then the opportunity to sit on city council came up and did that.
So how did you learn to be a carpenter and a contractor?
Well, it's interesting because in Cleveland there's unions and a very formalized apprenticeship program, and those, like I said, weren't available with the economy in the 70s. Here in Florida, that isn't the case. There are no unions. There aren't real big apprenticeship programs. So the program is kind of look over the guy's shoulder you're working with and learn what he's doing because he gets paid more. And if you learn that, then you get paid more. So that's kind of the apprenticeship program here, and you kind of move up that way. So.
And it really works like that?
It does. If you pay attention, like I say, you kind of have to kind of BS your way a little bit because at some point you can go and say, well, I'm a carpenter because I watched the guy for 6 months now because you don't have a card like you do in a union and you just have to be able to pull it off and, you can if you pay attention.
And you were able to do that?
Yeah.
You had your own tools and did you have a pickup truck?
Yeah. That was always an important thing. Have a pickup truck that runs and tools and you end up driving other people that don't have pickup trucks. So.
And then you become the boss.
Yeah. But there was so much work. I mean, certainly in the 70s and 80s, the construction industry was booming, more North County. But just there was certainly no problem being employed in Pinellas County during that time.
And when did it get less employment?
Well, probably the bust that hit recently, 8 years ago. But there was always some work going on somewhere in Pinellas County, if not residential, in commercial, or the beaches would be building condos, or there was always something to do if you wanted to work.
So you're doing this construction, you have your own company, you're a contractor, you're specializing in restoring historic homes, and how do you move from doing that to being someone on a city council?
That's a good question. If someone would have told me 15 years ago, you're going to be on the city council, I thought, you're crazy. That's not me. I'm not going to do that. But, I mean, it really happened as a result of that. I was a carpenter, bought a house in historic Kenwood that was a neighborhood that was becoming revitalized, and the kind of the plan was to buy a house and fix it up and in 5 years sell it and move into a better neighborhood. And 5 years later, we were in a better neighborhood because the neighborhood improved. And kind of got involved with the neighborhood association, more so to see what they were doing, because contractors and neighborhood associations don't always get along real well. You can't work before 8, you can't park on the street, you can't put your dumpster here. So I kind of went down to see what they were doing to make sure there wasn't anything crazy going on. But it really was a good neighborhood, and everyone was in love with these old bungalows and fixing them up. And that was sort of the glue that people of all walks of life and all economic levels, rich, poor, and in between, just had that common theme that they wanted to live in a 1920s, 3-bedroom, 2-bath bungalow. That needed a lot of work because it was, a somewhat questionable neighborhood 20-some years ago.
Does anybody live in historic Kenwood in the audience? No. Well,
We're a little bit
you might
west
want
of
to.
downtown. We're west of downtown. We started about 19th Street, and there's 1,400 bungalows, so it's the largest concentration of bungalows in the state of Florida. And in the 70s, it was kind of fortunate. It became a retirement community, and the good thing was our retired predecessors didn't touch them. They didn't bulldoze them. They didn't modernize them. They were just kind of left. So they needed repair and to mitigate the termites, but they weren't, like I said, they weren't bulldozed. They weren't gone. So we were able to come in and rehab them and turn them into a nice neighborhood.
So, okay, so you're doing that. You go and talk to the neighborhood association, and then what?
Well, what happened, well, we were starting to clean up these properties and really turn the neighborhood around, just with contractors, developers, investors, and actually didn't like what at the time was the Board of Adjustment was allowing to come back into the neighborhood. We had several, there's 20 or 25.
I'm not sure what a Board of Adjustment
It's a function of the zoning department. And we have, in Kenwood, you have garage apartments and sort of that ability for transitional living. You can rent a place, you can buy a house, you can buy a bigger house, you can move into an apartment. There's kind of every housing stock, which is great. But a lot of the, as we were fixing up the single-family homes, the apartments were kind of lagging in the development. And typically what you would have is something that was built in the 20s as a 6-unit apartment, and somewhere along the line someone had cut it up into 8, 10, 12 units. And wasn't a desirable property in the neighborhood. And the Board of Adjustment would then come down and allow, what we wanted was to get it back to what it was at 6 units, and they would say, well, we'll let 10 in, with no parking and chopped up rooms that were really small and just wasn't the character of the neighborhood. It didn't work. It just didn't work to have that many units with no parking and chopped up that way. And so I used to go down to the board and wait all day and get my 3 minutes to speak against, allowing a variance for this many units. It's too many for the neighborhood. We want 8, not 12, and things like that. And a friend of mine that worked for the city had said, you need to just stop complaining and get on the board and make those decisions and sit on the, at the time, the Planning Commission or the Board of Adjustment. And again, I thought, that's not me. I'm a carpenter. I'm not a politician, elected official. But he convinced me, and I put my application in, and Mayor Fisher was Fisher at the time, and appointed me to the Planning Commission. So we were starting to then make those zoning decisions instead of just fighting them.
That's such a wonderful story, because, there is a sort of illusion that, you can't really get involved in that way unless... you went to a certain high school, or you're a lawyer, or whatever.
You're in student government, and you went through the process to be an elected official.
Right, you were in St. Pete Leadership Program.
Right.
But this is, and Historic Kenwood, Scott, you and I went to one of their meetings, remember, their neighborhood, and there were like hundreds of people in their neighborhood meeting. I was just shocked with how involved your neighborhood is in the governance of it, and everyone's wanting to be in it. And it's a good lesson for all of us that just by being on these committees and slowly moving up, that you can really have a real say in how our town works.
Right.
So how long were you on this planning?
I was on the Planning Commission almost 8 years. And what we did there is we actually, ironically, now that we're going through the waterfront master plan, we started with the waterfront and some of the discussions and decisions, and then really just decided that while Kenwood and Old Southeast and Old Northeast and historic neighborhoods wanted the zoning to match their character, what happened in the 70s, they put suburban zoning on every house. So my house in Kenwood, if ever I went home and it was gone, and I wanted to rebuild it identical, I'd have to get 6 variances because the lot was too narrow, it was too close to the neighbors, it was too close to the street, it had a detached garage, and none of those things were allowed. Even though there's 40,000 homes in the city that met that character, they were all out of compliance. So one of the things we did on the Planning Commission was decide that we don't want to bulldoze those neighborhoods and build suburban neighborhoods. We need to create zoning that keeps them in compliance, encourages the redevelopment without having to go before the board to get all these variances.
And to keep it an urban place.
Right. So that's what we did. In that 7 years on the Planning Commission, we wrote every single land development regulation, 1,800 pages of codes to direct housing heights and widths and window patterns and styles, and went through, I mean, literally hundreds of meetings, but really engaged the public. I mean, thousands of people involved. And then the way it turned out, I was off the Planning Commission. I got elected in November, and within 5 months on council, we adopted that code. So we rezoned every single lot in the city, rezoned 90,000 properties at one time, and had no opposition whatsoever. Had about 2 speakers come and had some questions. But it was just a good job they had done with the open public planning process, but then adopted that code the first few months on city council. And the city then, that's when the boom hit, and you really saw the development fit the character of the city. We have the city we have today because of that, and because the historic neighborhoods now can redevelop without the city getting in the way and saying that doesn't work when it does. And the downtown and Beach Drive and things like that came as a result of that exercise.
And how many people were on this commission?
I think at the time there was about 11 of us.
Do you remember who they were?
Oh, yeah, there was, well, Carl Nurse was on it. He's a city council member. He and I served on it. Virginia Littrell was on it for a while. She became a city council member. Bob Jeffrey was on it. He went to work for the city. And there's categories. So there's contractors, engineers, realtors, finance people that have to fit the category so it's diverse, at least diverse from the categories.
So let me get clear how this works, because this is really interesting. So you have the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission basically does all the work and writes everything up, meets with everybody, and then you make a report, and then it goes to the city council, and the city council reads the report and I guess talks to the Planning Commission?
Yeah, a lot of what we do is a recommendation to city council. Some of the things we do are the final say unless someone appeals it to city council. But we do all the zoning, all the land codes, all the ordinances, and things like that to zone and do the land development regulations for the city.
So that means that in our city, a lot of things get decided by these commissions that are filled with citizens,
right,
rather than by the city council or the mayor.
Right, right. And we have staff. The staff works with the zoning department, the building department. We're all our staff as well that did that. But yeah, we were the ones that drafted the language, the final language, and made the recommendations to the city council.
I have to say, I didn't know that it worked like that. I didn't realize that these citizen committees had that much power and that actually work. I mean, that's a lot of work on hours. And you actually, your committee wrote up all the things, or did the city staff? Well,
the city staff did, and we had consultants, but we had all the workshops. We staffed them. We went out into all the neighborhoods and talked with people about what it was we were trying to do, that a combination of staff and planning commissioners would facilitate the meetings and talk with people about making those zoning changes and things like that.
So what made you want to move from that to be on the city council?
Again, it was just timing. At the time, the seat was open, as I was, in my 8th year on the planning commission. The district seat that I held was also term limited. My predecessor had to vacate that seat, so there were several people that were, considered to be knowledgeable enough and understand the city to step into that, and so I had that opportunity.
And you wanted to do it?
Yeah, at that time I kind of got that bug. I mean, it was kind of neat to take the construction background and get into city planning. I mean, we were really, almost like the building blocks in the monopoly board that, this part of town you're allowed to do this and build this high and these kind of units, and here's the commercial. And really the mixed use was a thing that was gone. It was the same thing in Grand Central, which is the Central Avenue part of historic Kenwood. They just said that's a commercial corridor and made residential illegal. And if you go into Grand Central, it was the downtown working class neighborhood in the 20s for the city. When downtown vacated for the summer, the working class people lived in Kenwood and Palmetto Park and lived year round. And Grand Central had these gorgeous apartments with 10-foot ceilings and fireplaces and Cuban tile floors and hardwood floors that were, again, zoned out. They said, this is a commercial corridor. You can't live here. So just putting that back into place, that it's okay to live upstairs and work downstairs and have these apartments and things, help change that corridor around as well. So just kind of got that bug that you are making a difference.
Right.
And again, with the construction background, applying that to it, and then seeing the city change. You know, that code wasn't in place when the first new condo was built on Beach Drive, and they didn't have to have the retail restaurants under it. And they didn't want to. They were residential condo builders that said, we don't do commercial real estate. We want to just build a tower. And the staff and the mayor at the time was able to convince them to, you know, this is the code, this is the way we're going to go eventually. And we don't want to be, if you've been to Tampa, it's just glass towers and there's a door on the corner to get in the condo and that's it. But requiring this pedestrian element, this commercial restaurant, retail space on Beach Drive, on Central Avenue, makes it engaging and inviting for people to walk. So it's kind of a planning exercise that you're doing pictures and studies, but then you see it actually built, and you start seeing your downtown change as a result of it was very rewarding.
So when you got on city council then, you had a vision in terms of how the city was going to look and develop.
Right.
Whereas someone else may want to go on city council for some other focus. So that was your specialty. Is that right?
Yeah, and I really, when I moved into Kenwood, I kind of, again, got that bug and was talking and said, you know, I'm starting my construction business. I'm renovating my house in a neighborhood that's going through a revitalization, in a downtown that's going through a renaissance. I said, I'm going to find a niche here. And I never would have dreamed it was city council. But it was just that sort of construction and the way the city was going, that you could actually, like I say, get involved and plan stuff and then see it built and see your city change. That really got me.
So what about, I mean, I want to talk about the city council, but okay, I get you're all wound up, you're going, and now you're off.
Right.
So where's the
relax
bug?
and take it easy. I know, well, there's still plenty to do. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the things that, you know, you're kind of involved with in getting there, you're still involved with. I'm the president of the Grand Central District this year. And the transit thing, that was the component that while I was on city council, I sat on all the transportation boards. So we're doing this planning exercise and we're designing this city for transit. We don't have transit. And we're designing apartments that you give bonuses because they're on transit corridors, but we don't have transit on the corridors. And we keep saying, well, we're going to allow you to build more and have less parking because of transit, because that's what every other city does, but we didn't have that. So I got, when I got on council, yes, we're working on that. So that's but I did. I sat on all the boards, and when I got on council, I kind of got put on PSTA, and at the time it was they shove it to the new guy because nobody wanted to be on that board. And it was just the bus network, and I got involved, and we changed that organization around and just really decided that, you know, we can't have a car-only county. We can't keep building roads and roads and roads and roads and keep knocking down buildings so you can have parking next to a building and then knocks down the next building so you have parking next to that one, and that we needed to change that, which was part of that planning exercise. But, again, we didn't have the transit. So one of the things that working on now and involved in is the green light Pinellas. We've developed a plan. It goes to referendum this November.
In November, yeah.
And we'll have that opportunity to build a rail transit city in this city for the first time since April 1st, 1943, when we stopped the trolleys last time. So,
what's fascinating to me is, here I'm going to admit complete ignorance, is that I never thought that when people went on city council, like you did, that it's so focused and that you really do develop this expertise and move that project ahead. I know you did lots of other things. I mean, you have done lots of things in the arts and so on. But I've always had the impression that you go on there and you have to know about a lot of things and you vote and you have these discussions. But what you're showing is that you develop these real expertise. Like you have expert knowledge in certain areas. And this is the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about, knowing that I was going to have Jeff, is that, for example, I read the paper every day. I talk to lots of people, but I don't know enough to make decisions on a lot of things about our city. And even the things I read a lot about, I don't know enough oftentimes to say, this is really the way we should do it. And when you're on city council, we hope that, and if someone's a mayor, that they have that. And what you're showing me is that when people are on city council in a really earnest and honest way, you really do have that expertise.
Yeah, it's one of the things you don't necessarily think about when you go on it. And I had that experience from the Planning Commission, which was a great leg up. But there's 9 other departments just on the city. And again, it's just the amount of reading you can't imagine. If you want to not make a fool of yourself and be informed when you make those decisions and vote, what people see is the last 11th hour. You've already had the committees, you've already done the research. All you're doing is voting in a public environment. But every week, the council agenda and the backup material is 250 pages. And that's 3 times a week over 8 years. And then if you're on PSTA, that's once a month, and their agenda is 60, 70, 80 pages. And if there's a report, the report might be 200 pages. And the MPO and the Tempe Water and the Convention Visitors Bureau. And I added it up one time, and it was close to 400 or 500 pages a week, which is the equivalent of reading the Encyclopedia Britannica twice since I've been on city council. So people say, you think you're smarter than me. It's like, no, I don't think I'm smarter than anybody, but I know I've read way more stuff. And I joke because, I know now when I drive down the road that the white line in the road has to be so wide, it has to be so long, the luminosity in the paint has to be a certain level, the spacing between them has to be, and you just know so much information that you can't help it. Look at things differently. I was with some friends down in St. Armand Circle when we were working on Grand Central and looking at how we can turn that area around, and I'm taking pictures. I said, do I look like a tourist? And they said, no, tourists don't take pictures of the curbs, because they had a really neat ADA ramp that kind of worked, and I thought, oh, we can do this, But you do. You definitely look at things very different when you're having that much information.
Absolutely. So former Mayor Baker was my guest here. And one of the things we talked about was that city council position should be full-time, given how much work you do. And he didn't like that at all, because he really favors the strong mayor structure that we have, and that if city council were full-time, it would maybe just threaten the strong mayor position. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think it is a full-time position. It's very different than it was 15 or 20 years ago, and I don't think it would diminish the strong mayor form of government. And again, one thing is we are also, someone in the city has to sit on all the countywide boards. There's a dozen countywide boards. I mean, PSTA, MPO, Tempe Water, Convention Visitors Bureau, Tempe Estuary. So if the council doesn't, then the mayor has to sit on all those. And I don't think Mayor Baker would have liked to sit on those. He was happy to have us fill those positions to represent the city. And, if we didn't do that, then we weren't represented. And those decisions countywide would be made without the largest city sitting at the table. So it is a full-time job. Everyone on council works full-time. It's not necessarily a full-time pay, but you really can't read the Encyclopedia Britannica in the part-time.
Exactly.
You can't.
Because, I mean, it's hard to have a full-time job, and then if you have to do that, and you have to travel. And
well, everyone on council is retired or self-employed. And one of the things when my term was ending, when I talked to people and asked different people that I had heard were interested, they just said, I can't afford it. My boss won't let me take off every Thursday for the next 8 years. And, I can't take off 8 years when I'm 32 or 35, or the median age of the city is now up closer to 40, and take off 8 years and then start my career again.
Exactly.
So it is a challenge that if you want a council that's reflective of the demographics of the city, you have to realize that you're going to have to pay them accordingly. Or figure out some way that you're not going to have all retirees or all wealthy people or all self-employed people, which is not reflective of the city.
Right. I mean, that's been a discussion. If you even go back to read Plato's Republic and read the history of ancient Greece, it's the same issue that came up. I mean, how do you get people to fill those positions who have jobs? or have families, young families and whatnot. And that is a dilemma. And then if you interrupt, as you say, for 8 years, unless you're going to go into another political position,
Right.
who wants to hire you? I mean, maybe you become a lobbyist or you do something connected with government, but I think that's difficult for our city because there's so many people who are so smart and talented and have
Right.
so much interest, but practical, we can't do it.
Right, right. No, it's a challenge. It's going to be difficult. And again, it's just a conversation that the community, and unfortunately the council votes its own salary. So it's always challenging to vote yourself a raise. It's just so politically incorrect to do that. But it is going to be a conversation that the community is going to have. If you want people that are reflective of the demographics of the city, how are you going to get them there, and how are you going to compensate them for spending that much time?
Right, right. And how about if you travel? If you have to travel to Tallahassee or something like that? Do you
We
pay
have
your own
we
way?
have a travel budget.
Oh, you do?
It's been diminished through all the budget cuts. And it got to a point where we didn't travel as much, and then you're not representing your issues aren't going forward. So you have to again decide, and you can't just leave it all to lobbyists. The other elected officials will get the information from the lobbyists, but they want to hear from the locals. They want to hear from the council members. They want to hear from people, and it costs money to go and travel and do that on both the state and federal level, even the county. Like I say, just to travel around PSTA and MPO meetings. I mean, it's just very time-consuming to, I was on PSTA 7 years, and it's not just once-a-month meeting. Again, it's if you're on the executive board, it's the executive
Weren't you the
committee.
head of the board?
I was chair for several years.
Yeah.
There's subcommittees. Again, there's background information. You have to meet with staff so you're informed. If the city has an issue that's not necessarily being agreed on, you've got to kind of mediate these discussions to get the thing where you want it to go when the vote comes. So there's a lot.
So how do you have a life, like a family, or sleep, or do the laundry and things like that? How does that work?
Dirty
Yeah,
jeans
we'll
on. No, you do. I mean, you certainly, you start early in the morning, and a lot of times I would have 7 o'clock coffee meetings at Kawa, and you just go all day, and then you're at a neighborhood meeting at 6 or 7 at night. And you balance it, I mean, because it is flexible. So there was times where, you'd have to be at a meeting. You're going to go to a meeting at 6 and be there till 8 or so. You go home in the afternoon and try and get some of those things done. And there's some flexibility in it. But it is challenging.
So one thing that happened on City Council was that you became good partners with Leslie Curran. And you seem to both work together very well and partner up on projects and had similar interests. Is that common to happen on City Council?
I think so. I think you find, and Leslie lived in Kenwood and was the District 8 representative, 2 council members before me. So kind of had that background that was common. So when we got there, we were very much for small businesses, for the arts, for neighborhood revitalization. But there's sort of pockets of, for lack of a better term, voting blocks, or that these 2 council members are really about youth programs, and that's what their focus is, and they kind of stay with that. And someone's very pro-business and wants to get bureaucracy out, and they kind of push those agendas. So those alliances are there throughout the council.
And is that a good thing?
I think so. We have the sunshine laws, so we're not allowed to talk to each other ahead of time. I can't go down to, Councilmember Cornell's office and say, I'm going to vote for your issue if you vote for mine. We're not allowed to do that. All that discussion is on the dais. So we do it through our subcommittee process and things like that. But you kind of know who has focus on certain areas and where their support will be or won't be.
One thing you mentioned that we mentioned was the relationship of the city to the state. And it was in the paper today about the emergency EMS, emergency, what's it stand for? Emergency service.
Emergency medical service.
That there's an issue with the county taking money, and one way would be for St. Pete to back out of the county and have its own emergency medical service, but that would require us to go to the state and have them change the legislation in order for us to do that.
Right.
Which surprised me that what happens in our town is regulated by what happens in the state, and then there's all that politics involved. And I mentioned this to you, and I thought the state is always complaining that the federal government's messing with them, but then the
Right.
state seems to be messing with us. So,
And then throw the county in there, who likes to mess with us too. And
so how does that relationship work? And can you count on the state supporting what's in our best interest?
I don't think you can count on it, but you have to work those relationships as well. And again, it's making those trips up to Tallahassee. These are our local legislators. They live in our neighborhoods in our city. We know them when they're here. But we have to go see them on their turf as well. And those things, whether it's the EMS or whether it's different grants, whether it's, I mean, a lot of things were required by the state to do. So whenever we want to change them or modify them, we have to work with them. And again, they're your neighbors and they're local, but you have to make that 4.5-hour drive up to Tallahassee to deal with them there. And it is challenging. That was another one of those things that you don't really think about.
Yeah.
And when I got on, it was the county's charter review time. They have a charter like we do. Once every 10 years, they amend their charter. And, 9 years ago now, their charter amendments were not friendly to the city. And it's like, here's your job, here's what you got to do, you're going through initiation, and you need to talk to your county commissioner to kill this project because they're going to, it's not good for us. They want to take away a lot of our power, a lot of our authority. We're the largest city in the county, and most things the county does, they have to have our support or we can opt out of. And they don't like that. They were trying to take that out of the charter. It's like, no, you're not taking it out of that charter. We want that in the charter. So we had to fight with them on that. One of the things I had to do, I had a court-ordered mediation because the county put them in there. We have 24 cities in Pinellas County. All 24 cities sued the county government. There were 2 that their charter doesn't allow them to sue another government entity, but they supported us. So we had all 24 cities suing the county. Something has to be really bad to get 24 cities to agree on something.
Right.
And the county was that thing. We had to do a court-ordered mediation. So we had a mediator. We had to rent a big hall. We had a quorum of all city councils and mayors in a room in a court-ordered mediation to resolve this conflict. And all day long, for 8 hours, it was unanimous decision of the cities to oppose the county. And we ended up getting what we wanted out of this charter, and that went away, and we remained having those controls and those things we wanted. And then you have to go out of that mediation, and then you sit with those same county commissioners on the PSTA and try and work with them on something you do agree on. So it's that kind of back and forth. But it's a big part of the legislative affairs part of your job.
Well, in this EMS thing, the other thing that became apparent is that if we did, as our city, back out and had our own, then the county's program would fall apart because they need
Right.
our money
They need our
since we're
income.
the biggest
Right.
city. So it's an odd relationship
Yeah.
with the county because we're so big and we provide so much funds.
Right, yeah. And again, they look at it as 24 cities, and I know they know why, but they come across that it costs so much more for St. Petersburg EMS than compared to every other city. But we have the entire interstate within our city boundaries. We have, probably 40% of the tourist industry. We have, we answer, I forget the numbers now, but probably 60% of the calls for service can come out of St. Petersburg and the surrounding areas for the whole county. So that's why it costs more, and that's why we have to pay our firefighters more because they're going all the time and they're working on things. So it's a challenge to convince them that, sometimes the biggest city gets the biggest budget, and there's a reason, and things like that. And they do know that because there's a taxing authority that the county has that pays for it, and if we carved out our piece of it and ran our own, then they wouldn't have enough to run it for the rest of the county because we generate more taxes than we take in. Or we generate more taxes for the system than we use.
So what's evident in this conversation is how much you know. So here you've had all the 8 years on the planning committee, all the 8 years on city council, and you're incredibly knowledgeable. And now you're not on city council. You're not working for us anymore. So how do we not lose this valuable knowledge? And to me, I think that's a big issue. I mean, we have these people who have been working for us, who we've elected, they've done, and then they're gone from that role. So how do we keep what you know and use it for us?
The city has a great network for that, and it is with all the different public entities. We've had like I said, with the Planning Commission, those were volunteers and people. So there is that opportunity. The Council of Neighborhoods engages all the neighborhood associations, the Chamber of Commerce with all the businesses, all the business districts, the Grand Central, the Edge, the West Central. There's all these opportunities with whatever your category. I mean, the arts. Now there's St. Pete Arts. There's the Arts Alliance. There's 5 different arts districts that are involved. So there's plenty of opportunities to stay involved, and they all do a pretty good job of networking and sort of feeding into the input for your government, and hopefully your council members are listening and paying attention to those boards and taking that input in. So there's plenty of opportunities to stay involved.
Well, with all that you know about our town, where do you see us going? What would you really like to see happen?
Well, certainly with the transit, because I've worked on that, like I said, when I was chair of PSTA, and just really turning that organization around from, admittedly, when I got on it, they said we are a social service agency. We move people that don't have cars. And just the amount of money this community, the state in general, but certainly this community has never made the investment in transit. So we have this opportunity coming up in November to vote on this plan, to build a rail system, to more than double our bus system, to have a real transit network in the city. The Howard Franklin Bridge is being replaced in 5 years. Part of that is to have a rail connection over to Tampa. Tampa Airport is expanding its intermodal center. The two will meet at the West Shore Mall. Then Tampa will decide what to do. It'll eventually go down the I-4 corridor where the bullet train would have gone to Orlando. I mean, all the pieces are coming around the state. And we'll be the first one, we think, well, we won't be the first one to go to referendum. Hillsborough did in 2010, but we think we're in a much better position to pass this referendum for an additional sales tax to build a real transit system. And that's going to take a lot of my time. That's what I want to keep working on because we need it. We're spending $40 million a mile to build US 19 right now. And when it's done, and I don't know what done means, it'll never be done. Because when it's done, it'll be at capacity, and we'll build another off-ramp. I mean, they're talking about double-decking Sunset Point Road in Dunedin to accommodate the traffic. The 118th Avenue connector, where it ties 34th Street to 49th Street to 118th, that one intersection is $460 million to build a triple level cloverleaf to move people on 3 streets at one intersection. And
how much?
$460 million. And nobody complains. Now, if you mention rail, they think it costs a fortune, but our roads cost us tons of money. And again, we have to have this community discussion. Again, I don't know what finished means, but if 19 is finished and we're going to continue to grow even at a reasonable rate, then do we make Belcher look like US 19 or Starkey look like US 19? We have to build options. We can't have a community where you have to have 2 cars, you have to drive from home. You have to shop here, work here, entertain here, beach here. We have to integrate mixed use, transit, walkability, and do those things. So that's what I'm interested in. That's kind of got started with the Planning Commission, and now this opportunity to stay involved, to really change that community.
It seems so consistent with your path.
Right.
It really fits your path.
Yeah, and just the stuff we've done, the people that, 15 years ago, even 7, 8 years ago, they came here and thought this was a sleepy town 7 years ago. Look what you've done. It's like, no, it's been so much more. Just the walkability. Downtown was all one-way streets that were 45 miles an hour, and people forget that we've changed probably 70% of them to two-way streets and slowed the traffic and put sidewalks in. And Mayor Fisher put trees in for the first time. It was a concrete jungle. So you start building a walkable community. So, like Mayor Baker said, it's a 20-year overnight success. It started with planting trees, and then it's widening sidewalks, and then slowing the traffic, and then going to two-way, and then allowing you to live upstairs. And so it's been years in the making, and now if we can add this transit component and be able to redevelop our city. I mean, we're built out. 96% of the land in Pinellas County has development on it that is developable. And if we don't want it to stop, we just have to redevelop it. And I think that's the exciting part. That's where it gives us that opportunity to protect our neighborhoods and just take these commercial corridors. How many vacant Kmart's are there in Pinellas County right now? That can be redone into mixed-use condo, retail, live, work, entertain spaces that'll be close to a transit system, and give people that option that you don't have to have 2 cars and a lawn to mow to live here, that you can have other options and have 1 car. In Pinellas County, I could just go on and on with this transit stuff. But in Pinellas County, the average home is $150,000 in Pinellas County. If you could get rid of 1 car and put that towards your house, you could live in a $250,000 house and have 1 car and not change your job and not change any of your expenses. And that's a big difference in housing stock in Pinellas County. You go from $150,000 to $250,000 without a raise or without changing anything. Just the cost of your car applied to your mortgage, 1 of your cars, not even get rid of your cars, get rid of 1 of your cars and use a transit system if you have that opportunity. And again, just that's what young people want. That's what empty nesters want. We're at a competitive disadvantage with our businesses. So to me, that's the exciting opportunity to start redeveloping our city into a much more mixed-use, pedestrian, transit-oriented community.
So when I listen to you, it's like, well, of course we're going to have it. But there are people who don't want it. And what is their major argument? Cost too much?
Yeah, well, they say it costs too much. I think there's just a lot of people that have sort of an anti-rail sentiment that it's going to run over budget. It's who's going to ride it. PSTA only moves 1.6% of the population. Why do you need a transit system? And a lot of that stuff. But I think most people
agree. And are
agree.
Those legitimate objections?
Well, again, if you're in a built-out community, we're the most densely populated community, and we have lost population for the first time in our history. So the question is, do we stop and close the doors and say, we're done, we can handle 967,000 people, and hope enough are born and die at the same time to maintain it because nobody knew it was moving in, then if that's what we want, then that's what we'll do. But if you want people to come in and even have a reasonable 5 or 6% growth rate, you have to put them somewhere, and we can't do it with single-family homes and $40 million mile roads like US 19. Right. Just give people options that they don't have, and the businesses. One of the examples that we hear is, we're home for Home Shopping Network, and QVC's in Atlanta, I think. Yeah. And what Home Shopping will tell you is, one, when their celebrities come to town, they have to send a limo to get them, because how do you get from the airport to Home Shopping? If Elmo Lagasse comes into town, he can't take the transit. The bus system is not that great to get here. They have to send a limo to take him over to do it. And their employees, what they pay, the area around Home Shopping is higher-end housing stock, so the employees live further away. They have to drive. They have to build parking. They have to do all these things where QVC has transit. They have, they feel they're at a competitive disadvantage to their main competitor because of the transit network and the connection to housing. In Tampa Bay, 61% of your money goes to housing and transportation. So if you're an employer, it's difficult that now I'm going to have to pay my employees, and 61% of their money is just get them housed to get them to work. If you're a retailer, this area becomes unappealing because 61% doesn't leave a whole lot for everything else, because that's just transportation and housing. If you had health care and groceries and clothes and things like that, it narrows what you'll spend. So retailers and other businesses look at that and say, it costs too much to live here for there to be any money left over to spend. So those are the kind of things that we have this opportunity to change and make it more affordable to live, more affordable to move around, and be more competitive with the rest of the country.
And it seems like with most things where you make major changes, once those changes are made and you get used to it, like, living in New York City, the idea of not having public transportation makes no sense. I mean, it's just what you do. And you really don't want to get in a car unless you have to, go out of the city to buy groceries or go to a lumber store or something like that, or go to the shore. But it's just part of who you are. So I think that that's another thing. Once we do it, people will see the benefits of it, and that it's easy to do.
And it's just getting out there and talking to people. And when I was on the Planning Commission, we were going through that land code rewrite. People would say, I don't want more density. And they say, okay, what do you want? Well, I want to be able to live upstairs and work downstairs. I want my kid to have an apartment close by. I want grandma's assisted living facility be near mine. And then you go, okay, well, that's what we call density, but that's what you want. It's just that community where you don't have to have all the apartments over there and all the single-family homes there, and that you want, this is what you want. And you talk about those conversations, say, yeah, we need to build developments with 100 units per acre, and people freak out. And then you say, well, Fusion's 120 units per acre. Oh, well, okay, I can deal with that. They have to be able to see it and just have this conversation as to what those things mean as far as a community.
The thing that's so wonderful is how much you love this town. It's really striking how much your heart and how much you really get excited about making it all better. It is. It's a great city. When you just go out and walk around, you can feel that vibe. And again, with the planning, I tell people, like to get downtown the first Friday, everyone's on the street having a block party, listening to band, drinking beer, and they don't realize that the tallest building in Pinellas County is on one side of the road, and the oldest building in Pinellas County is on the other side of the road. But that pedestrian environment between the two matches and engages people, and there's sidewalk cafes on both sides, and it's perfect. And people just enjoy, that kind of environment. And it really is just a great community. Yeah, and it's just getting better.
Yeah, it is.
So it would, it behooves me to ask you to say some things about our city and its identity as an art town. So here's your opportunity.
That's one of my new roles. I'm a fashion model for Spass House now. I got a call, so they're going to bring me a necktie to wear. But that's one of those things that has been going on for years and years and years, and has finally got the notoriety. And we're just now engaging, and you talk about myself and Leslie working on those things to, get the city to recognize it's not just the beach balls on the waterfront. That's not the art. That's the industry. It's jobs. It's expanding your tax base. It's keeping people employed, and having that ability. So doing things that we do for other businesses with the Spark, the St. Petersburg Artists Resource Collaborative. One of the artists said, what city resources are already in place that you can help artists with? And we have a business assistance center, but there was no program to teach artists to do web presence or lease agreements or marketing. So we created a program geared toward the artists the same way we would towards hairdressers or towards accountants and things like that. And just really realize that is a big part of this community. Again, you have to put it where people want what they need to hear. If it's jobs, then it is jobs, and show them it's jobs. And things like that. And again, it's just very obvious when you have the art walk, when you have the main sale, here in this museum, how many hundreds of thousands of tourists come here. It's just amazing. And again, it meshes into that fabric, that pedestrian, that vibe, that walkable community that's got art around it and creative people. And if you read the book, The Rise of the Creative Class, that St. Petersburg could have wrote that book. Because it's not just the artist. It's the marine researchers and the engineers and the draftsmen and the architects. And they're all part of that creative class that this city is just full of.
We are,
and
isn't
it's just, there's so much that, again, Peter Betts and Marine Research been doing that for 30 years. And, that's a big part of this. So it's fantastic.
And that's going to get even bigger.
Oh, yeah. It's all huge. And it's just, again, so many times you hear, and we like to, beat up our neighbors in Tampa, but, we have conferences, and people say, I should have stayed here and gone to the conference in Tampa because I can drive over, go to the conference, and come back because this is the place I want to be afterwards, because this is where the nightlife is, this is where the bars are, this is where the restaurants are, this is where the people can walk around on the street. That other cities are fighting tooth and nail to get that, to get a waterfront, to have a walkable Central Avenue, to have a beach drive. We were lucky that during the 80s we were kind of asleep at the wheel and didn't mess all that up with a lot of glass towers that weren't real engaging. So it was a good thing.
So, who'd like to ask Jeff a question? Yes, sir. Could you stand up and say your name?
Hi, I'm John Kramer.
Oh, wait a second. We have a microphone. Because every one of these is recorded and put on YouTube, and it's also on our Facebook page, Our Town St. Pete. So we want to get your question.
I'm John Kramer. I'm just here for 4 months in the winter, and first time ever, and really enjoying this town. And I'm just wondering, what are the employment? Who are the big employers, and what are the industries here, and what is the city doing about, creating opportunities for entrepreneurs or startups or things like
those
that?
are great questions that we deal with all the time. I mean, certainly the tourist industry is our largest industry. Construction was second until this recession that we've hit, so the construction industry fell a little bit, starting to bounce back now. Our largest employer in the county is Raymond James. It's a financial, and there's a lot of that type of sort of data storage industries. The medical industry is huge right now with the partnership with Johns Hopkins and All Children's and Bayfront and Baycare and St. Anthony. So we have several of those clusters, the medical cluster, the finance cluster, and then this marine research cluster that's always growing. But we are looking not only for more of those, but also how to help those that are here. If the tourist industry is our number one industry, what are the things we can do for the waitresses to get them health care and to get them education and to get them in housing and things like that? So we're always kind of struggling with that to find the way to help that industry so that is a comfortable, viable industry that we take advantage of.
And for entrepreneurs, USFSP has a whole entrepreneurial program. And then on Wednesday morning, there's a million cups,
right,
where people go and pitch different ideas for companies, and there's people with capital there that engage that. It's a very active and popular Wednesday morning event, and good things have come out of that.
It's at it's behind City Hall. There's the City Hall Annex, which is an old historic building that's been reconverted right behind City Hall. And the Chamber has moved in, so we get a lot more partnerships with the Chamber and what they now call the greenhouse to grow businesses. The Chamber has a staff member there. The city has staff there, so they work together to help small businesses and entrepreneurs start up.
Who else has a question? No questions? Yes, sir. Will you please stand up and say your name? And we have a microphone.
I'm Jeff Hearn, part of that wonderful group of Raymond James. But what would it take to get a Jabil to move downtown from your experience in the city council and the types of things that need to all come together to make that line up?
I think when I've had talked with businesses or talking with staff, a lot of it's the housing, the transportation, the schools, kind of any business. It's kind of like they can be impressed with the beaches and the golf courses and the sand, but then when the due diligence people come, what they look at is your housing stock. Can we have our employees live close by? Can they afford it? Can they get around, with your transportation network? What are the quality of life things? This thing we're doing with the Waterfront Master Plan and the Urban Land Institute coming in, they've pointed out things that we kind of take for granted, that we have a downtown Publix, that cities 3 times our size don't have a downtown grocery store, and we're so fortunate to have a walkable downtown Publix. I think those are the kind of things that employers look for. I'm not sure with Jabil specifically what their issues are, but there's certainly land downtown. We seem built out, but if you go down Central Avenue, every intersection has surface parking, right. And there's certainly plenty of opportunities for more employment. And I think it's kind of that combination of everything, with the housing, with the public safety, with the transportation. Hopefully we'll answer some of those questions and just have to kind of hold back the floodgates of everybody that wants to be here. So.
What do you think how it would change the nature of downtown if Jabil relocated part of their place downtown?
I think it becomes more like what we have with Progress Energy, or the hospitals are kind of campus environments. But when you have employers right on the street, then your employees need a place for coffee in the morning, for lunch, dry cleaners. So other businesses open and feed it. Where now where Jabil is, they're on a campus. You drive, you park, one of the 5,000 cars there, and then you leave and go somewhere else. And again, it gets back to that changing that environment to have the businesses integrated into your mixed use.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes, Linda.
Thank you. My name is Linda Marcelli. My question is, how do you see urban agriculture coming into our city? Do you think there's a place for it?
Yeah, we have had that conversation, and several years ago we started with the community gardens, and a lot of times really good ideas people have and then realize either it's not allowed in the city or it's just not even addressed. So we've changed the ordinances to allow community gardens, and they're having the discussion on sort of the bigger urban farming, where that can go. And I don't have all the answers. We're just starting it in the tail end of my council term. But are there places where sort of the vacant swashes of road along the interstate that are just mowed with grass, and we spend a ton of money to mow them and remow them and remow them? Are those opportunities for that kind of thing? Or some of the things we've seen is the rooftop gardens, things like that. So the city's open to that. We've got a really good environmental program. I mean, just our fleet and the number of buildings that are LEED certified and solar powered, and they've really figured out that that's a good model to follow, and that's just one piece that they are looking at.
So Linda Marcelli and I both sit on the Peace Patch Project Board,
Good.
which is a great urban
You've been leading that discussion, dragging the city into that discussion, which is
agriculture involved
yes.
with education and healthy eating, and it's a fabulous program, and the city's been very helpful in that. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm Randall Cochran. I live here about 6 months out of the year and live in Minneapolis, the other part, but and been here for 3 years and absolutely love the city. I think one of the keys to the Jable would actually have a nice station stop and a light rail line right at their doorstop would really be influential in having them come downtown. But my real question is in regards to the pier. I was extremely disappointed in the process we went through and have the whole thing just flop. And now it just seems like it's just dead and dormant, and it's just, I look out my window every day at this eyesore out there. And I'm wondering, from your experience, it must have been extremely frustrating on the council going through that process to see all the momentum and that, and the whole thing just get the legs cut out from underneath it. And my real question is, how does this thing get momentum again and get it done and get something done?
Yeah, that is going to be a challenge because it did have momentum, and one of the things I knew when I got on council, there were several things that were going to happen in my term, and I was excited about that being one of them. It's just, and you're absolutely right. I think we had the good public process. We had all kind of meetings. We got all the input, and then there was kind of a void in the discussion while once we picked the Molson Group and picked the lens, the staff and the administration went behind closed doors to negotiate the contract for 6 months. And the only people talking were those who were against it. And that was our fault, the administration's fault, for not keeping that discussion going. Because, and what I used to always say, and a lot of my colleagues agreed, the pier has always been about the future. And I was on part of the Planning Commission was the Historic Preservation Commission. And I was probably one of the strongest advocates for historic preservation. And they kept saying, why do you want to tear down the pier? You need to preserve it. The pier has always been about looking forward. It was why the city was here, Diston wanted to build it in Diston. It could have been in Pinellas Point. It could have been on the west side. Putting a pier in the water at Denman's Landing was why the downtown was here. It was the first electrified building in the city was the electric pier. The Mediterranean Casino defined us as a tourist destination. All those things were unique, one-of-a-kind departures from what the city was to move the city forward. Certainly when I hear people say that the lens didn't fit into the character of the city, I said, do you really think that inverted pyramid fit in the character of the city in 1969? It was, again, that trying to shed the old retiree green bench mentality and build some stark-architecture thing out on the water that was going to wake people up. I don't know where it goes from here because it was difficult that that momentum was lost. I was at the chamber meeting looking at the waterfront master plan piece for the boating industry, and they were talking about some jetties and breakwaters. to protect the boats, and said, and we can have running paths and bicycles and places to sit. And I'm like, and if you loop it around, you've got the lens, you know?
Exactly right.
It's the same discussion.
Yeah.
But I know it's going to be challenging for the mayor and the council because it was just, it was one of those things that it got behind, and those that wanted to move forward could never catch up because just the misinformation that there was nothing to do out there. It wasn't going to last. I mean, all that stuff. And you talk to people, and they would say, you know what? I don't care about the lens. I don't like it. I just want to fish, and I can't believe you can't fish out there. And say, no, you can fish better. The docks are going to be lower. It's going to be easier to fish on the lens than it is on the pier. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, I'm for it. But you can't do it one at a time because so many people just heard there's nothing to do. And so I don't know the answer to that one. It's one that I'm going to have to hand off to my successors because to me that discussion will be going on for years now that we've fallen on that one.
And one of the big things about that is that it was very divisive in our city. And from the time I've been here, about how long have we been here, 10, 11, 12 years, I've never seen that in this city. And it really shook me that there was such animosity and going on. And I think that before that has to heal before we can embark on this, because people definitely aren't going to agree. And I think things are too raw to really start that sort of discussion again. We need to just get back to our cooperative city.
I've seen a few of those divisive issues, but that one was a big, and one of the things I read an article, and I said I want to read this from the St. Pete Times, that an injunction was filed to stop the demolition of the pier, and the Save the Pier group lobbied City Hall, and I was reading all this stuff, and all the anti-lens people in the audience agreeing, and I said, this was 1969. And there was a group to save the casino that hated the pyramid, and this thing repeats itself, that people hate what's new, they don't want to lose what's old, and then they finally come around and love what's new and hate, but you're right, I think there is going to have to just be sort of a let it go for a while. And
well, what's interesting about it is one of our members in the audience, Jeff Hearn, his dad was involved in, your father was the city manager, assistant city manager when the pyramid went up. So he has good stories about
that. Yeah, that's had to have been every bit as controversial as the lens. Yeah.
Well, any other questions?
And by the way, there is a stop proposed very close to where Jabal would go downtown on the transit. So look up the green light Pinellas for those of you that are voting this November. It's probably one of the most important decisions this county is going to make in 50 years. Again, because of the Howard Franklin connection, if we don't do it now, we'll wait for the next Howard Franklin replacement, which is about 40 years from now. So we'll remain disconnected from Tampa, sitting on that parking lot between the two cities. So it is moving forward. It's on the ballot for November, and swap your property tax for a sales tax and build 28 miles of light rail and 65% more buses and trolleys and all kind of good stuff.
So I want to thank you all for coming, and I really want to thank the people you two gentlemen who aren't here all the time, but nevertheless seem to be passionate about our city. So I'm glad that you are participating in this. Next month, in April, it'll be April 24th, my guest is Tom James. So I hope you all come back to that. And he, of course, is an important business person and one of the biggest, if not the biggest contributor to, as a philanthropist in our city. And he is also the head of the trustees of the Dalí Museum. So that should be exciting. So thank you for coming, and let's thank Jeff Danner again.
Thank you.